Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caroline Modoresi-Tirani, and I am delighted to welcome the inimitable Saskia Nino de Rivera to our stage this morning. She co-founded the organization Reinserta. So thank you so much for being with us. And, the work that you do with inmates and particularly juveniles is so holistic, and you specifically seem to focus on restorative justice. So, I just wonder, for all of us that don't necessarily know what that term means, what does that mean to you, and how does that translate to the work you do with these kids?
Of course. So it's an honor for me. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Tina, for having me. I always like to start off when I'm in a room full of women. Like, nothing can come out bad out of a room full of women. So this is great, and I'm super excited. And thank you all for being here. So in Reinserta, we work with restorative justice because I believe that restorative justice is the future to restoring the world, healing the world, literally. And I know it sounds corny, and I don't want to say it from a corny and cheesy. And I just want to say we need to get back to basics on who we are as human beings. And as human beings, literally, we're so caught up. We're just talking about, social media and whatnot. And what happens is the first time I started to go into a prison, and I've been in 112 prisons.
112 prisons.
Yeah. And talking to inmates, I started saying, these people have stories. And what are the stories that these people have? And how are we part of those stories as a society? I remember this one time, and I'm going to say the story just really quick because for me it was a key factor to just restorative justice. I was interviewing this mother in prison, and I thought she was like 40 something, and then by the time she said she was 27, she was my age, but because of the drugs she looked really, really, really bad. It was this woman that had an awful childhood. She was the mother and the father had a huge drug problem, so they would leave her at the age of 4 and her 2-year-old daughter for 2 or 3 or 4 days sister for 2 or 3, and they had to go out, look for food in the trash can, survive. She was raped by the age of 7. She was being prostituted by the age of 11. And there I was talking to this woman that had been in prison twice for robbery. And then the director of the prison comes in and she looks at her and she looks at me and she says, Saskia, why are you wasting your time with this criminal? And I said, in that moment, I didn't understand what was going on. She's like, did you tell her that you have been in prison 2 times before and that she called her like ruthless in front of, and I went back home and I remember that I literally like stopped feeling my legs that day. And I went straight to the floor and I started bawling and I was like, how dare we call this woman a criminal when we weren't there when they were raping her by the age of 7, and when we weren't there when she was being prostituted, and when we weren't there when, she was left alone by the age of 4. So this is for me restorative justice. We need to understand that the things that are happening in the world do have consequences, and we can't turn around and just say, those people that are, have a little bit of traumas or whatever, let's just like shut them out.
Oh, and one of the things you just mentioned, I feel like that from talking to you, that you have so many stories because, as you say, you spent so much time in the prison system. One of the things that was shocking to me was that you mentioned that not everybody in charge of the justice system in Mexico has actually visited a prison. You tell us a little bit about the governor of Baja California.
Yeah. So what I think what's happening as a society is that as we are putting, people aside that are not part of our society and did not work well with our society, we have forgotten. If we talk about poverty, if we talk about, segregation with people that don't have the same education as you do or whatever, we tend to segregate as human beings, and we have to understand that we have to stop doing that. What is happening in Latin America, and I do believe in the States it's happening too, is that we are forgetting about the prison system. We believe that whatever happens behind those jail doors is not our problem. And it is. And in Mexico and in Latin America especially, that fact that we have forgotten about the system has created a huge crisis in security. And it's really interesting because part of my job as Reinserta's co-founder and director is to talk to authorities and to society, because society makes things happen, not authorities. And I remember I was in Baja California, like just 2 or 3 months ago this happened, and I sat down with the governor and I was talking to him, like your prison system this is happening and we need to change this, and you have kids that are in your prisons and we have to get things going for them.
And you'd think he'd be, interested in this because it's affecting his communities.
Of course.
Right.
No. And I was actually talking to him about security, because what's happening is that what's happening in prisons in Mexico is there's kidnappings going on in prisons, there's extortions, there's a lot of, so I was trying to talk to him about how it's going to affect him as a governor if he puts, order inside his prisons. And then like a month or 3 weeks after that, the director of all the prisons called me and says, Saskia, I need to say thank you. And I was like, why? And I was just doing my job, right? And he's like, for the first time in the history of Baja California Sur, the governor went to a prison and talked to like the guards and talked to us. And it's like, what's going on? It was the first time, and I was like, this is a joke. Like, it's the first time for him. He's like, no, one governor has ever come into a prison in this state.
That's unbelievable.
And it's amazing because that can't happen.
And in terms of, I mean, the that sort of is one jaw-dropping kind of moment. That there are so many jaw-dropping moments, I think, in the sort of history of Reinserta. I think that one of the things that people in the audience might be wondering is, when we hear, certainly in the United States, about what's going on in Mexico, particularly when it comes to crime, we think about the cartels. You see what impact the cartels are having from a very unique vantage. You're seeing it from the vantage of children and teenagers. Can you just tell us a little bit about the role that cartels are having in corrupting young kids?
So I'm going to just step it back for 1 second. Is Reinserta works with children that are in contact with the prison system, with the criminal justice system. And this is not a Mexico or Latin America, or it's a worldwide problem. Like the children agenda is a worldwide agenda. And we have people in prison, and we have kids that are in contact with the system. What Reinserta does is that we work with children, 1, that are born and raised in prison with their mothers, 2, that have mothers or fathers or both in prison. This happens a lot. We never think about it, so-and-so was arrested. Does that so-and-so have kids? If he does or she does, what's going to happen to those kids? And we need to start thinking about that. And lastly, and it's a little bit of what you're talking about, is what is going on with the juvenile offenders. So there is a huge opportunity for cartels in Mexico and in the US too, because I do believe it's a bilateral situation that we have going on, is that children are they're easy to mold, unfortunately. We've all been teenagers. We all know how easy, I see a group of girls that are like 12 and 13, and they all look the same, right? And they all dress the same, and they're all looking for an identity. And what happens is that cartels are looking at this as an opportunity. In Mexico, and especially 2 cartels, are using children to train them by the age of 7, 8, or 9 to kill people, to move drugs around and that kind of stuff. There's actually like a university in the Sierra of a part in Mexico, and they take these kids there, and the kids stay there for 4, 5, or 6 months, and they're trained literally to kill people.
It's a criminal university.
It's a criminal university. It's called Damasos University. It's crazy. Of course, it's not registered. Don't get me wrong. But when you go into the prison, talk to the inmate, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, Damasos University." Like, people know about it, and it's like a space they've created. And then my juvenile offenders come, and I have kids that are 14, 15 years of age that have killed 20, 30, 40 people. And I have them in my halfway house, and they started killing around 8 or 9 because they're easy to mold. But then again, we're calling them criminals. And for me, if an 8-year-old has a gun and is killing someone, we have a problem as a society. It's not that kid's fault per se.
We've neglected him or her somehow. Absolutely.
An 8-year-old, we need to dement what's going on.
I mean, I want people to kind of get a real sense of just the type of work you do. So, you specifically work with hardcore prisoners and juvenile offenders. I mean, you mentioned, children that in some cases have murdered 15, 20 people, which is just sort of unfathomable, really. But I want to play a video now of a young man. His name's Felipe, and he was fortunate enough to be a part of the Reinserta program. So let's just take a little look.
Antes yo nunca me imaginé cómo salirme de ese bache donde yo estaba. Pero ahora tengo un trabajo que fue un sueño hecho realidad. Tengo una familia. Yo nunca pensé estar así como ahorita. Hay muchos como yo que necesitan el apoyo de las personas que confíen en ellos y que les den como una segunda oportunidad.
So Felipe, he's 19 in that video, and he's born and raised in Oaxaca, in the Sierra de Oaxaca, which he was from very poor. His income is $1.50 a day from his family. So he one day woke up by the age of 7 and said, I've had it. I don't want to live out of $1.50 or $2 if it was a good sell day. And his whole family lived out of that. And he got into a bus by himself and he came to Mexico City. And of course, you know, by living up in the mountains and then coming into Mexico City, it's a huge difference. And he became a street kid. And he was in prison 3 times by the age of 18. And when he came to Reinserta, he did not know how to read or write. He barely knew how to speak Spanish. He knew how to speak Spanish because he had an indigenous dialect, and he started. We taught him to read and write and to be able to sell things. So it was. He's a really interesting kid that literally never had an opportunity. He was raised on the streets, and now he is working in a producing agency. He brought his little brother because where he lives, they don't have high school or middle school. They just have until the sixth grade. And he brought his brother to Mexico. We put him in school. We got money raised for him. He graduated in August from high school with literally a 4.0, 3.8 GPA average, the brother. And he's going into college now. And he has he has done so much. Felipe is a really interesting case of if we give these kids an opportunity, they can come out. And that's why Reinserta has really decided to work only with hardcore crimes. What's happening is we need to understand that kids that are committing hardcore crimes is for a reason. And we need to understand that reason. In Mexico, it's not like here in the US where you can judge a minor with an adult sentence.
Right.
So the maximum sentence that we can give in Mexico is 5 years. You
5
can kill
years.
200 people and you're not going to get more than 5 years.
And
in
that's
prison.
it.
Exactly. So what Reinserta does is that we look at the juvenile offender centers as opportunities. So they're not prisons, they're areas of opportunity where we need to take these kids and help them come back into society, you know, well adapted and putting their criminal life behind.
And, you know, you mentioned in Felipe's case, I mean, he had been in and out of prison 3 times before the age of 18, which is just a shocking statistic. And it's not just in Mexico. I mean, the rate of recidivism, I think, what is it? Half of people who are in the prison system in Mexico are likely to reoffend and go back into the system.
As in the States.
I was just about to ask you. So, I mean, you know, we think in the United States that we're so much better, and we're not. You know, our rates are just as stark. So what kind of work are you going to start doing? It's very exciting. That you're going to be starting to actually do here.
Yeah, so Reinserta, one of the Reinserta's main donors has been the U.S. We're attacking the security because a lot of people are like, oh, she works with the prisons. We do, but from a security point of view. So we just opened. Last week, they told me they gave us our 501c donation thing.
501c3, fantastic.
Yeah, and we are doing a huge campaign that is happening right now with Facebook. I'm actually going to be in Silicon Valley with Mark Zuckerberg's left hand or something, presenting. I don't know who he is. I'm sorry. I'm that type of person.
That's okay. He probably has a robot hand somewhere.
Yeah, like everyone. And it's going to be amazing because I do believe that the criminal situation that is happening, not only in Mexico, but in the U.S., is a bilateral problem, is a bilateral situation. There's a lot of consumers and a lot of drug dealing going on in the U.S. There's a lot of consumers and drug dealing coming in Mexico. There's a lot of, you know, arms and guns that are selling bilaterally, and we need to attend this problem as a dual situation. So I'm excited because we've just opened offices here in the States.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and one other thing, I mean, the way you're talking, I think that after a while, sometimes you can kind of, you know, you glaze over a little bit when someone's reading off so many statistics because you just sort of think, oh, that's kind of perfectly normal. I mean, it's so not normal what you're doing. You know, it really is a remarkable thing. And I think that people would be interested to know as well that you're a mother.
I am.
You're a mother of a 2-year-old.
I have a 2-year-old, yeah.
How did having your daughter change your perspective on the kind of work you're doing?
So it's really hard. We were talking about this just a couple of minutes before with Tina too, and I also work with children that are born and raised in prison. We've created a model with the Canadian government that we're going to launch internationally, is how to work with kids that are born and raised in prison, because we never think about this, but the kids that we work with, for example, have never seen certain colors because they've never been outside the prisons. Or they've never seen...
Wait, they've never seen colors?
Colors, certain colors. What colors do we have in prison? Gray, orange. You guys have orange. We don't have orange. There's black. you know, the guards are nursing back. So by the age of 3, they've never seen purple. They've never seen red, maybe if there's blood anywhere, but like so we need to work on the development of these children. And it's been really hard for me since I became a mother, because seeing kids that are in prison and live their first years in prison is so hard to bear. And especially when you, like, my daughter is everything to me, right? And she like lives in a palace in my house. Like, I've created a princess thing for her, you know? And just like a couple of weeks ago, something happened. It's like they raped a 2-year-old boy inside the prison, and they called me. And I remember that night putting my 2-year-old daughter into her princess castle's like bed, and there was this 2-year-old in prison that had just been raped, and it was like this cannot happen, right? So it's, the good thing is it happened, like it turns into gasoline for me. So I'm very passionate about my job, and I do believe that we can change the world if we all react and we all act right now. But there are days like that day that for me is just like, someone take me out to the pasture and shoot me.
Oh
like,
my,
literally, I can't even.
I mean, how many of us can imagine in that situation? It's just unimaginable. But you know, you're talking about that this is your gasoline, and I want to make sure that we don't end on a depressing note, because the work you're doing is creating profound change. And one of the things that you've helped to do is that children born in Mexico's prisons, they used to stay there until the age of 6 or sometimes even longer. So these are kids that were born in prisons. But you helped to get that law changed.
Yeah. So the first law in Mexico that we have for children that are born and raised in prison was created by Reinserta. The first time I went to a women's prison, there was all these kids running around, and I was like, what are these kids doing here? And the director looked at me like, what do you mean, what are they doing here? Like, they live here. And I was like, no, is it a visiting day today? She's like, are you okay? And then I realized, I was like, yeah, so mothers in prison, women in prison can be mothers, right? And we need to start talking about it. So I went out and I started looking in the laws who talked about these kids, and they did not exist. So we named them the Invisible Kids, and we published a book where they talked through pictures. If you guys go into the website www.reinserta.org, you can see it. It's a beautiful book, traumatizing book, but a beautiful book. And thanks to that book, we created the first law in Mexico that talks about the rights of children that are born and raised in prison. And when can they be there, and under what conditions can they be in the prison?
I mean, that's just truly, truly remarkable. Thank you so much, Saskia, for joining us and for just telling us
you.
about this work. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.